My game of the day from round 3 of the Tata Steel Chess Tournament is Wesley So against Richard Rapport. A couple of days ago, after Rapport lost in the first round against Ulyanov, one of my viewers posed a very good question online. They said, can Rapport get away with this flamboyant style in such elite tournaments? And in this round, against Wesley So, who's a very orthodox player, somewhat in the style of Ulyanov, Rapport played a really sensible opening. He played a standard mainline Queen's Indian with black, and the position they reached after 15 moves has been played before. Those of you with eagle eyes and who follow the channel closely will recognize that this is a game that was played in the Olympiad between Tomaszewski and Ponomaryov in the Ukraine-Russia match. So white play in this position, it's a locked pawn structure, somewhat akin to a King's Indian, not a Queen's Indian. Black has a nice knight established on c5. White has a space advantage. White has given up his dart-squared bishop. Now, is this piece, this dart-squared bishop of Black's, is this a good piece or a bad piece? Well, at the moment, it doesn't look very good. If that piece ever gets into the game successfully, it could be very strong because it has no opponent. So let's bear that in mind. So, this game from the Olympiad. In this position, today, Wesley So played rook h1. In the Olympiad, Tomaszewski exchanged on c8. Let me just recap this game very quickly. Now, this knight has manoeuvred round at h5. So, white is playing for g4. First of all, white brings the king all the way to the queen side and plays g4. So, okay, white has been building up to this move for a long time, but Ponomaryov has defended very, very cleverly, bolstering the pawn on h5. And he sits very solidly on the king's side, and now he even begins to target this pawn on h4. And eventually, well, Tomaszewski didn't need to, but eventually he gave up this h4 pawn, and Ponomaryov won a very nice game. But this was fascinating defensive formation, defensive setup from Ponomaryov. Excellent game. So this was Wesley's improvement over that game, rook h1. And bear in mind that defensive formation of Ponomaryov. So Rapport exchanged on h3, played queen d7. At the moment it looks very passive for black, but his position does have potential. Knight h2. Well, this possibly looks at pushing with g4 and possibly unleashing the f-pawn as well. But okay, if the pawn goes to f4, then of course it would open up this bishop's diagonal. But this is more about trying to get in g4. So Rapport played h5, so very much akin to the Ponomaryov game. Now, after the game, Wesley said he didn't like his next move, which was f3. And we'll see why in a second. He thought for 21 minutes over that move. Instead of that, he could play for g4 in a more direct way. For example, like this, bring the queen over, and then go for g4. And this is very much like the Tomaszewski-Ponomaryov game, but actually black is holding firm in this position. No, shouldn't be any problems there. Okay, let's go back. So f3. Well, Wesley So gets in g4 anyway, but you can see that Rapport isn't in time to get the rook to the h file, but instead he played very coolly, played his king to h7. And he's not worried about the exchange on h5, because actually suddenly the initiative would swing over in black's favour very quickly. The rook will come to the g file. This bishop can reroute to this diagonal, and once it sits on f4, then suddenly black gets a tremendous attacking position. Now that's what I meant earlier by when I said that this bishop at the moment, or a couple of moves ago, looked very passive. Here, suddenly it activates brilliantly, and when it hits that diagonal, it has no opponent. There's no dark square bishop from white to trade it off. So Wesley has to be careful here. He played rook h1, but at the moment those rooks are completely stymied if black keeps the position closed. Rook g8. Queen drop back to d1. That lends more protection to g4, so Wesley would obviously like to swing the knight round to g3. Bishop g7. And knight f1, and this bishop hits this superb diagonal, and looking particularly at the f4 square, beautiful square. Now, for the last few moves, g5 has been possible, but Wesley declined to play this. Why? Well, this actually gives black great potential, because this break f6 is very annoying for white after this exchange. Then black can target this pawn. Can also switch to the f file, doubling on the f file. Suddenly black has the initiative. That bishop could also switch round to this wonderful diagonal again. Okay, what about waiting with knight g3? Well, this bishop has the chance to hit e3 and come into d4. No wonder Wesley said earlier that he wasn't happy about his move f3. Interesting. Because it leaves these dark squares very exposed. So Wesley played king f2, stepping away from the g file, which potentially could open. Okay, understandable. But here, Rapport found an amazing move. Bishop c1. Absolutely brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. He played that after 1 minute's thought. Now, clearly that can't be captured because of the knight fork. And this bishop move is incredibly annoying. If the pawn moves... Well, first of all, we should say that if the queen tries to protect the pawn, of course it doesn't protect it at all, because you can just take it and there's still a knight fork, very amusingly. If the pawn moves, then the bishop comes to b2, force the knight out of the way, you take on g4, and suddenly the pawn on e4 hangs. Incredible. Wesley, therefore, just gave the pawn on b2, played knight g3, bishop takes b2. The knight has to move, knight b5. At least the knight protects this pawn on e4 now. And now here's another very cheeky move from Rapport. He just brought the bishop back to c1 again, of course still immune, and he's going to land the bishop on f4, this wonderful square, and he's a pawn up. Well, for the moment, for about one move, as Wesley took on h5. But didn't bother recapturing. Rapport didn't recapture. Bishop f4, wonderful square. If white captures on g6, then the g file opens in black's favour. These rooks just look completely out of it, as in the game actually. So Wesley is really stuck here. He brought the knight back. Now, how should black proceed? I mean, there are various things you could do. You could take here and then recapture on h5. Black is a clear pawn up, but after this move, matters aren't so clear. Suddenly targeting this pawn, of course you don't want to trade because that would bring the rook on h1 into play. Okay, what else could you do? Well, I thought maybe rook g7 to prepare doubling, that's possible. Or maybe rook f8 and slowly preparing f5. But not Rapport. That's not for him, not these slow methods. his play round here is incredible. He played f5. Extraordinary move. Of course, it'd be wonderful to open the f file against the king, but this allowed Wesley to take on g6 with check and then play knight f5. So this knight has reached this absolutely glorious outpost. But Rapport has done this just so the g file opens, gives him time. And now you can see these rooks are so powerful here. These rooks, by contrast, completely sidelined. The black rook wants to come down to g2, and the white rooks can't step back to h2 because, of course, the bishop hits that square. So this is a wonderful pawn sacrifice. Wesley stepped back with the king. And now, if rook g2, then knight here isn't so clear. But Rapport's next move, again, extraordinary. Such incredible imagination he has. b5. Remarkable, remarkable. If knight takes pawn, then the rook comes to g2, and there's no knight to block it on e2. This is the point. So this is basically deflects the knight away from defense. And the rook will come to d2, maybe black doubles with the rooks, maybe knight d3. It's tremendous. What about bringing the knight back to e2 anyway? Well, you just take here, and that's a very pleasant pawn. The queen can come into the game. The knight will come into d3. Black stands very well. Wesley took the pawn with his own pawn, but now rook g2, and if knight e2 trying to block out the rooks, then of course b5 hangs. And what a difference. The king is just in desperate trouble. Wesley played queen b1. So giving this pawn a bit of protection, and then he's hoping he can play the knight back here. And here's where a Rapport starts to wobble a little bit. Richard probably should have played rook d2 with this idea, but also knight d3 actually. And here is an amazing variation. Let me show you this. Knight e2. Now you could play knight d3 here, but this is a mad idea. Of course, this is computer generated. But let's see. a4. Just let me run with this variation. So a4. And the point of this move a4 is after this. Let's trade on g3 first. And knight b3. It's all about bringing the queen into the game. So the point of a4 is to enable knight b3, blocking the queen's protection of the pawn on. And on the next turn, the queen will take on b5, and that is absolutely fatal for white's king. An incredible variation, but somehow not beyond the wit of Richard Rapport, it has to be said. Instead, he played queen f7. Now, clearly, he's looking to bring the queen over into the attack. But after knight e2, things aren't so clear. And this next move of Rapport's, I have no idea why he played this. Probably he himself has no idea why he played this move anymore. Poor guy. Just allowed a knight fork, and who knows what he overlooked. And it's really over. In desperation, he gave up this rook, but there's nothing here. He found a trick. The reason he did this was to play rook g3, and white just has to be a little bit careful. Knight takes is no good. Knight takes f4 is no good. There's a nice trick. Rook takes h3, and suddenly black is back in the game. But Wesley wasn't born yesterday. He took here and played the rook back, and white is a whole rook up. And this next move was very nice. He wasn't afraid to give up his queen. Played knight takes, just trading pieces down. And after this, here white has to give the queen. King d1, knight f2. You don't want to go there, not so clear. But giving up the queen is by far the simplest way to go. And after knight g8, something nasty is threatened. So actually the king with the knight protecting it is completely secure. And now white is going to deliver checkmate on the other side of the board, incredibly. h5, of course that can't be captured because of the knight fork. Very simple, rook g6 enabling knight f6, and now the king is caught in a mating net. And well, there's a couple of checks, but they run out very quickly, and white wins with the rook g8 mate. Well, such a pity for Richard Rapport. Played with such imagination, but unfortunately he couldn't crown his wonderful play with a win. And Wesley So strikes again. Incredible. Thanks for watching.